Let's follow up on the debate over affordable housing in this country and what's on offer from the parties in this election. Tsur Somerville is a senior fellow at the Centre for Urban Economics and Real Estate at the University of British Columbia. Good to see you, Mr. Somerville. Thanks for being with me.
Oh, it's a real pleasure.
Okay, let's start with the state of affordable housing in this country. How big is the gap between supply and demand, or do we know that?
So, what we know, it really depends on markets. And in places like Vancouver, Toronto, our high-priced markets, we have a very severe affordability problem, both for poor people in social housing, but also for a lot of middle-income people and young families. When you get outside those high-priced areas, then it tends to be much more of an issue for people who have low incomes, because housing prices, in Montreal and in Atlantic Canada, the prairies, for people who are on low incomes are creating challenges. And then we also have the problem with First Nations and Reserve, where there's just terrible housing problems. So these are different issues for different groups of populations in different parts of the country.
Okay, that may in part answer my next question. I was going to ask, what do we mean by affordable housing? I'm not sure everybody gets what that is. It's this broad term that people use, and we're hearing a lot of it in the election campaign. Affordable housing. Okay, what does it mean? Who's it for?
So, when we look at housing, we sort of have this benchmark that we think that a household shouldn't spend any more than 1/3 of their income on housing that is, safe, of appropriate quality, in an appropriate location. And that would apply to a renter. And for owners, it would apply to looking at their mortgage payments with property taxes and other things thrown in. So it's really an issue of, if you put 1/3 of your income to housing, can you get the housing that's appropriate for you? And so you can see if housing is expensive for people on low incomes, then even renting is a challenge. But then at the other end, if you're looking at first-time home buyers, their ability to save enough money to make a down payment that gives them a mortgage that works puts them sort of in a bind from two sides, saving, but then the mortgage side as well.
Sure. Okay. So in your view, how big of a priority has this been for governments in recent years? Has there been a clear commitment to try and wrestle this problem to the ground, and including building more units?
So I think there's been a lot of talk about it, and certainly the Liberals with the National Housing Strategy put a lot of effort and put money to it. But one of the problems is that building new housing, if you want to build social housing, is really expensive, particularly in the expensive markets, and it's going to take more money than we've been willing to put up, and it also takes neighborhoods willing to take more density. And one of the challenges in the high house price markets has been that a lot of neighborhoods don't want to take increased density. When you're looking at the First Nations province and reserve, that's just a lot of money in places where housing can be difficult to maintain and preserve. And so we're fundamentally looking at a problem that takes time to solve, because you can't snap your fingers and make housing, and then it's an expensive one to solve as well.
So we heard the NDP leader promise today to build 500,000 new affordable housing units over the next 10 years. Does that sound like a realistic promise?
I think whenever you're sort of tying numbers, it becomes challenging, because let's say you're doing this in Toronto. Let's say, okay, we want to build, affordable housing. Well, whatever you try to build right now probably isn't showing up for 5 years at least, right? You've got 2 years to build it, and you've got, a multi-year process on the regulatory side. So, we've created a system that makes it really difficult to deliver these things quickly. Their $5 billion number, it's would be in addition to about the $15 billion that the Liberals put in with the National Housing Strategy. So it would be on top of that. But you can see that even when you put in $14 billion to a program, you don't magically change the housing equation immediately.
What do you think? What is the best approach to building more units? And I guess what role should the federal government be playing? Because there's lots of options here, right, to how to increase the housing stock. Is there one model that works best, or do we need to consider just a combination of getting more and more people involved in how we do this?
It's really a lot of different programs and different approaches for different communities. The federal government has a role. It probably is a better role in terms of, matching provincial dollars, because fundamentally it's a local problem, right? Housing is not a national policy per se. It's a lot of local policies. It's national when you talk about financial markets and insurance and mortgage markets and those kinds of things. So you'd want, particularly from the NDP, to make sure that their money would be matched with contributions from the provinces. You'd like to see them working with the provinces. They talked about working with low-income providers, but the provinces are really the mechanism where government really interacts with service providers. At the same time, you can't run a policy without also thinking about young families who are trying to transition from rental to ownership or finding rental housing that's appropriate. And if you're not going to also work and solve some of the problems at the local level with people willing to allow more density and allow more supply, you're really not going to be able to solve this problem.
We heard Mr. Singh today criticize the Liberals' approach to housing policies. He's citing the Parliamentary Budget Officer who analyzed the government's housing strategy and determined that there would be a 19% decrease in the average proportion of GDP spent on social housing compared to the previous plan that was in place. So I guess that's what people are wondering, and I'm wondering what your view is. Are we spending more or less than we've been spending in past years on trying to fix this problem?
The actual amount of money is going up. The Liberals put in a bunch of money, but that included matching from provincial governments and a variety of other sources, right? So the total increase, even though they were committing to a program that had a large number with it wasn't a large actual increase, but an important step. There were a lot of programs that were being phased out, and sort of replacing those programs, even if it's not a net increase, was still an important step to take. So, I think what you can look at the NDP's position is, well, we want to spend more on something where the Liberals really have invested a lot of time and effort, and it hasn't delivered, the extent of returns that I think people want. But that's in part because it's actually a much more expensive problem to solve than we certainly have been willing to spend on.
All right, we should note the Conservatives, the Greens have an affordability housing plan as well, and the Conservatives say they'll have more to say about this during the course of the campaign. Tsur Somerville, thanks so much for your time today. Do appreciate it.
Oh, you're welcome.